Hello, Jared. Welcome to today's show, I should say. And Jared Greenhill is a senior director at Unit 42 at Palo Alto. And we had the pleasure to work together a couple of years back at Sony. But I basically will hand over to Jared to explain his very interesting career and share a bit his insights which he gained from that. So over to you.
Thanks, Guy. Appreciate it. And I'm certainly happy to be here and spend some time with you and going over my career and some of the highlights that I see are the most exciting. So when I look back at my career kind of as a whole, even to a little bit of my childhood, I remember my dad coming home from work and bringing a Unix PC into the house, probably in the mid 80s or so. And that was really my first exposure to computers. And it was really that was the exciting part for me that built up over time where we had a computer in the house. And that led into just, as you can imagine, learning the intricacies of operating systems and, computers at a high level and then digging in and from there kind of building up into running my own bulletin board system in the 90s in high school. So technology kind of stuck with me. And as I moved into my career, actually after college and into the IT field, I figured it was really a great place to get started in the kind of the help desk side of the house and systems administration side. So that's really where things started for me as far as like true foundational, working in a business environment and having to use some of my skills professionally. So, I worked I had several jobs, throughout college and then into, after college that were tech related. And those were again, help desk systems administration. I was able to get in front of a wide user base and spent about 7 years or so in that space, really mastering operating systems and, getting into networking and all those kind of core foundations that are needed before you dive into information security. So when I think about that, probably 7 years or so on that side led into kind of my first information security roles that were more on the information assurance side, where we're thinking about policies, procedures, incident response plans, those type of things. So spent a few years in that direction supporting the federal government in the United States and realized that I wanted to be more hands-on in the security side of the house. So fast forward to about 2012 or so, where I joined US CERT as a malware analyst. So I had some security background at that point and had some engineering that built up even before that. And that was really the kind of formative years for me in my career around 2012 when I got into the malware side of supporting, our US government as part of DHS, now CISA, back then US CERT, where I was kind of spent all my days for about a year and a half looking at malware and understanding how that tied into larger intrusions. And that was, at that point, I really kind of had the background of at least malicious code and analysis as it pertains to digital forensics. So I had malware pulled out of cases and trying to think about, with the analyst, how the attack vector was, what was the initial infection vector, what were the capabilities of the malware. So I think that part to me was where my career really kind of transitioned from more engineering-based, administration-based into the analysis side of what we call digital forensics and incident response. From there, after, about a year and a half of looking at malware, 8-9 hours a day, I wanted to kind of come up against a new challenge. And I kind of talked to myself and my friends and other people that I knew in the industry. And I said, hey, where can I get in front of the most exciting type of security work out there where I'm going to see a little bit of everything, anything and everything, and have a diversity of what I'm getting in front of. So I joined RSA at that point as an incident responder. And when I look back, I really think that was, the pinnacle at the time of like, hey, I want to get in front of helping organizations, investigate some of their biggest problems. And for me, that was, I began traveling the world, responding to incidents. Back in the early, around 2013, all of incident response and, digital forensics or DFIR a lot of that, or most of that, was done in person, face to face. There wasn't as much remote work there as now. So I really got to work with a team of some of the smartest people that I knew at the time, and we traveled the world, a lot of it domestically in the United States, but we were responding to some of the most prolific intrusions. I think about APT-17, Deputy Dog. There was a ton of intrusions that we worked. That group was really prolific in 2013, 2014. So we worked many intrusions related to really some companies back then didn't really have the security posture that we would hope for, and that allowed me, those intrusions really got me in front of some of the wildest times and most formative years.
Were
Yes, please.
you basically on the periods where you were in duty, and then wherever the incident was happening, you would go, as you said, on the spot and do your work? Because that's a bit the way I can imagine things.
Yeah, it was. And we'd usually have teams of, 5 or 10 guys and girls, men and women on site for months at a time, especially at the beginning of the intrusions. And so you really not only made a new family sometimes, but you worked through some of the most technical problems and solving some of the, answering the questions of, how did this happen? What happened? What was exfiltrated or stolen? And I had never done that before completely, in a full workflow, right? I did do pieces, I did malware, I did some engineering, I did some monitoring, but as a team now, you had to do that collectively, understand what happened, is the adversary still in the environment? Were they still, what was their goals and objectives? Were they able to execute on them? So all of those things for 2.5 years, I breathed and sleep that life. And looking back on it, again, it was the most exciting. It was also the most stressful time of my life. So I think when we think about formative years, those, 2.5, 3 years, 3 years or so, were the most exciting for me.
Super. I think, at that time, it's you marry on the one side the more, the complete technical understanding and looking at artifacts, looking at rebuilding, looking at what happened. And on the other hand, I guess also trying to understand the adversary. What was the intent? What is I see bits and pieces here, but where did he come from, and where did he want to go, or where is he going? Essentially,
Yeah, I think, back then when we think about those intrusions, many organizations with intellectual property that nation states, we won't get into attribution, but nation states certainly were targeting some of the most prolific technologies at the time. We think about semiconductors, we think about, kind of internal property around business relationships, really anything that government was chasing. They would look to the private sector to kind of find that data, or even maybe leverage those relationships from a customer to get deeper into another customer that had what they want. So yeah, there's just some things that really haven't changed in the 10 years that I look back to those times now. Maybe they're done a little bit differently, but yeah, I hope that, provides some color.
Okay, super, thanks.
Yeah, and then so when we, from there, after spending about 3 years of being on the road for about half the time, really just going anywhere and everywhere, as I mentioned, I wanted to, slow down a little bit. And that's where we met when I was at Sony. So I joined Sony after my time at RSA, where I joined internally to be one of the primary technical leads on the digital forensics team there, which was part of the larger incident response capabilities that Sony has. So I spent 3.5 years, helping build the practice there, and also, performing investigations and working with the larger global incident response team. And you and I met in Asia when you were in Singapore. So part of that job was, you invited me out there, and we certainly met in more of a training capacity when you asked me to help train some of the folks in Singapore. So I look back at that time fondly as well, where I was, certainly doing some of the, heaviest lifting also that I've ever done, but I was also charged with training and building capabilities internally to help grow a global team, right? From a let's follow the sun and let's make sure that we have the right people that know how to do the jobs all over the world. So I felt that was a different type of excitement, and I was ready to slow down in the sense from traveling for, months and months on end. But, I felt the reward there was seeing the team grow, myself growing, but then, selfishly growing myself, but then growing other people too along the way, and making some relationships, and having the unique ability to visit wild different places in the world, right? The Asias, I'd never spent time there, and to do that, that was another very rewarding part of, the 3.5 years or so I spent at Sony. And then moving on from, the deep dive analysis and training that I did at Sony, I did find myself really wanting to get back into the consulting world, right? There's a pace and a rigor and excitement of not knowing what's next. And that's when I decided to join a small startup called Crypsis in March of 2019. And they, at the time, had been around for a few years. It was a small boutique incident response firm. Their mission was to serve the cybersecurity insurance world. So, insurance, cyber insurance became a thing around, let's just say around 2014 or so. That had started to pick up. And the owners of that business saw the opportunity to kind of get in front of that work specifically. There was plenty of it. It was new and exciting. And so I joined. I had a few friends over there that, recommended me and recommended the role. So I joined it as a director of digital forensics and incident response there. And similar, working a lot of, high profile intrusions, and then also supporting small and medium sized businesses where, really you kind of felt the need of small business owners, supporting them in their time of need when they were up against, let's say, devastating ransomware attacks, where the success of their business would be maybe forged on if we were able to help them get back up and running, swiftly. So, though, plenty of other work there too, but that was also kind of really rewarding in the sense that the customers really needed us. And we did some larger work as well, but, kind of fast forwarding to the end of 2020, I got a phone call on a Friday night. We were all kind of, hey, let's all jump on a team meeting. And that's when we found out that Palo Alto Networks was purchasing Crypsis in, mid-September 2020. So at that point, we were all very excited. I think we all knew that would happen one day, that startup would get purchased. Happened a little bit faster than I thought, a year and a half in, and obviously 6 months into the pandemic, it was kind of a little unexpected, yet wildly exciting that a big company like that was going to buy us. And as Palo Alto moves into, their mission at the time was starting to be, let's be the most successful or, biggest cybersecurity company in the world. So that kind of goal and mission had begun around there as well. We had joined in about 6 months after that acquisition in the spring of 2021, we merged with Unit 42. So Unit 42, if you're not aware, was previously strictly the threat intelligence arm of Palo Alto Networks, right? Their mission was to provide timely threat intelligence to the world through not only their public blog, but other partnerships throughout the world to really let industry know what was going on, both from a nation state perspective, but also a cybercrime perspective. So that merging of incident response, digital forensics and incident response consulting with the threat intelligence arm of Unit 42, that kind of came together in the spring of 21. So at that point, my job was still very much leading cases technically, but then also let's grow the business. Let's build our consulting practice. Let's grow it. Let's begin to merge all of the hard work that Unit 42 has done, and then bridge it with the threat intelligence that we're doing day to day, right? To have threat informed decisions around, what is the cyber landscape, right now? How does that affect our customers that are knocking at our door? So, for the last, we think about that, it was 21. So now it's, roughly 2.5 years later, still doing a lot of that. We've just grown as a company, and day to day, my life is, at least at work, is truly, I'm truly blessed to have such a rewarding career. I still lead cases technically, but I'm also, one of the leaders there in the practice. So I run our intern and associate programs, right? So I manage our early career teams, and I'm also charged with the integration of threat intelligence into the professional services IR and DFIR work that we do. So spend a lot of my time, in those spaces, and also recruiting to grow our team and make sure that we're keeping up with what our customers, candidly need from us when they knock on our door. So that's in a at a 50,000 foot view, that's my career, kind of summed up. So I do appreciate you giving me some time to explain it.
Well, thanks for sharing this with us. You just mentioned at the end that you were growing the teams internally, but I believe also that you have on the side also some teaching jobs. So it's teaching others. Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me. That is something that's been in my life now for over 7 years. And so when I think about that, when I was at Sony, I had, the program that I graduated from, the master's degree at George Mason University. It's a digital forensics program. I'd pitched a class on memory forensics. I saw that there was a gap in the curriculum there. So I pitched it to our director, and he said, yes, absolutely. And so I created a curriculum there. And since the spring of 2016, I've been teaching this class, at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. And so in that class, we're looking at, memory as it applies to incident response. So what can we tell about the investigation that complements the memory side, that complements the traditional host-based investigation that we're doing? So we can do a lot with memory in short. And I've really enjoyed getting in front of, I probably taught about 50 different students in 7 years, maybe a little bit more, pretty small class, usually around 10. So maybe actually probably 75 students. And candidly, I've recruited a lot of them to work with me both at Sony and Crypsis and Unit 42. And it's been a great way to help grow the next generation of cyber professionals. And it's very rewarding to give back, as I'm sure you know. So that's been a real positive in my career and something that's still a big part of my life.
Super. Just looking at, you explained to us a little bit your very rich and, career. What if you must have learned, and you mentioned that many times, you must have learned a lot. So if you would address yourself to your peers, what is the wisdom you learned in these years? Especially security is, you can run left and right, but after a while you understand a few of the fundamentals, you kind of emerge in your mind. And what would be some pieces of wisdom you wouldn't mind sharing with your peers?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I think about it, it's probably not new to anyone, but when you find your area of passion, if you can stick close to that, it makes your job much less of a job. It becomes something that you wake up and you're truly excited about. So that can look different for many people. For me, it was, candidly, like memory forensics and running against and, working in intrusion where I didn't know much about memory forensics. And it led to a whole area where I was able to dig in and do a bunch of research. And I was able to, create not only the class that we described, but I was able to work with others and provide a layer of depth that was, not everybody knows about that. So I think becoming a specialist, and even as you promote in your career, staying special with that thing that you love is something that is, so valuable. So I still try to do that even as I promoted. I still try to work memory forensics in the incidents that we work at Unit 42 and obviously teach in that space and try to keep that relevant. So I think that's, those are some of the things that come to mind around that.
Super. Thank you. And obviously we talk about your peers. My next question is more, we suffer in cybersecurity of a shortage of people. Yeah? And luckily there is now more, and you teach at university, more programs to prepare people for the cybersecurity career. And there may be many people now thinking about that because they see that there is a growth sector or they're interested in cybersecurity. There may be even people who are already at the beginning of their career, and they obviously the security has become so wide these days and also so deep in some sense. And so it's not always easy to decide which direction to go. Is there any advice you would give them to have a good foundational part of their career at the beginning?
Yeah, so that's definitely a tough question. I think, part of, again, my kind of teaching career is kind of like a counselor, right? So I'm having to think about these things, and usually I leave it to the students to kind of reach out to me and other, I do get this question a lot. I think, again, it kind of ties into the earlier question where it's through, as you grow and begin your career, if you do find something exciting, don't be afraid to get deep with it. You probably like it for a reason. Maybe it's malware, maybe it's, host-based artifacts, whatever it is. Spend the time figuring out what you like. Similarly, try to also diversify, right? A lot of degree programs let you touch a lot of different topics. So if there is that elective, or even if you're not in school, you don't have to get into InfoSec from, a formal education program, but dip your toes into diverse areas of study when it comes to cyber, right? Maybe, like networking is still very important. The host-based analysis is important. Malware is important. Really put yourself out there and try a bunch of different things, and don't think that that one thing is necessarily what it has to be forever. Like, really put yourself out there and try a bunch of things and see what is most exciting to you. And I think, even slightly unrelated, but just as important is, it shouldn't be your parents telling you or your friends telling you to network, right? It's so important. I look back, 20 years into my career, and some of the people that I knew early on, and especially with InfoSec, being, probably 13, 14 years, some of those same relationships that I met, like folks at a conference or I met at work, like some of those relationships are still in place. And that's going to be largely where you not only grow yourself, socially, but like for careers, you're going to, a lot of times you keep in touch with these people, and your next job may be related to a relationship you've built some time ago. So I think the networking side is equally as important as finding your passion area.
Absolutely. Even though we already took a bit of time, but I have one last question here.
Sure.
Whether in when you look at forensics or incident response, the question is always, there's a technical piece and there is, rebuilding or trying to understand. But do you mentally have to, do you feel like a detective, or do you feel like a psychologist who try to understand, what the adversary had in mind? How do you represent that in your mind?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we think about attribution. Attribution is very hard, really putting somebody behind keyboard. So, that's always what people want to know, and it's the hardest question. But moving slightly higher up from that, it's understanding what the motivations of the attack are. I think that's still a really important aspect of the job. So at a minimum, our clients, and personally, myself and my team, are always trying to figure out how the incident happened, right? The initial infection vector. So that's that's important, because you want to know, certainly selfishly, why, but then to how to stop it for next time, right? How do we get better? What was the vulnerability? Was it something that's broad and well known, really old from a patching perspective? Or was it something new and prolific, like a 0-day vulnerability that's affecting a perimeter firewall that nobody knows about yet? So I think we're still, me selfishly, I'm chasing that, but it's something that we have to answer for our clients whenever possible.
Super. Thank you so much. I think in one of the next videos, we'll look a little bit more in digital forensics and its evolution over time, and also where is it going. So I'm already looking forward to diving a bit deeper into the topic. So for the moment, thanks so much, Jared, to you for having shared these insights with you and a little bit explained to us who you are. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, Guy and everyone watching, thank you for your time. I truly appreciate it.